Okay, so we are studying the second book of Shmuel, and we are in chapter 8, and we are on verse 16. Where we are now is we just finished an intro to or a discussion which will, it's a summary of the big wars that King David HaMelech fought with 6 nations all around, and some of them ganged up on us and helped each other against us. And so we had a very summary description. I mean, within 15 verses, we had described 6 wars, 6 big wars that took years and took time, and like the David HaMelech, that's expanded a lot the borders of the land of Israel with those wars. Now we sort of have an in-between section, a few verses describing the David's men, basically. Who are the people that were helping David achieve all that he achieved? And we will discuss each one of them in detail and see who they were and what they were and how where else we see them in our history. Very interesting bunch. And then we're going to go into chapter 9, which is solely sort of in between the war. It's sort of in parentheses, something that David HaMelech did for the survivor of the dynasty of Shaul, okay, the son of Jonathan. We will talk about that. And then he goes back to the wars, okay? So we're not going to go back to the wars, but when he goes back to the wars, there will be a lot to discuss, because over there, the next section will be description of detailed description of battles, specific battles and how they went, and very interesting. But now we are in the in-between, and let's just talk a little bit about David's men. So all of those wars and the years that David HaMelech ruled, he ruled his total time on the throne was 40 years. He got it when he was 30, and the first 7 years he did in Hebron, and the next 33 years he did in Yerushalayim. So we are now in Yerushalayim, and we're in the process of understanding what his administration is like. So the first in command that's mentioned is Yoav ben Tzruya Latzava. Yoav ben Tzruya is a character that we know for a while. He is his right-hand man in terms of military leadership. Yoav Tzruya is the sister of David, and Yoav is her son. So Yoav is David's nephew, and he has Tzruya had 3 boys, Yoav and 2 others. One of them was killed by Avner ben Ner, the general that helped Saul rule his army. So only 2 were left, and they were the generals of David, where Yoav is the older one, was the main one. They had a difficult character. The whole family had difficult characters, because Tzruya apparently was a very strong woman, and she had a very strong DNA, and she managed to give it to a whole bunch of her children, and they were difficult. So difficult that David HaMelech many times, a couple of times, said, "Oh, the sons of Tzruya, they're just headache. They just, just leave me alone." He was trying to move away from Yoav for all of his the whole time, because of the difficulty and the unpleasantness that he caused from time to time. But he never succeeded in doing that, and Yoav was his right-hand man until the end. Yoav afterwards was killed after David HaMelech told his son Shlomo that he has a long accounting, an open account with Yoav, and that needs to be taken care of. And indeed, Shlomo did it. But for the duration of the life of David, Yoav ben Tzruya is totally on board, and he's the second in command, essentially. He's Ala Tzava, he's in charge of the army. Now, the army is not just army to fight the enemies, even though this is probably why it's mentioned here, because he was one of the responsible for a lot of the wins. He was like the Arik Sharon of that generation. He was a much more pious and much more observant than Arik Sharon. But in terms of the military, he was very, very successful. And he also, the army that's talked about here is a combination of the army that fights the enemies and the National Guards. Some sort of internal army that is helping David rule the nation. So he was on top of it, and he was doing all of the heavy lifting for David, leaving David to actually rule like a king should rule. A Jewish king their job is not to go fight wars. A Jewish king, their job is to teach. Their job is to lead the Jewish people from spiritual perspective, not militarily. Yes, they have to take care of the military, they have to make sure that the sewage lines are working. They have to take care of everything in between. Trade, economics, everything. But the main thing for the king is to deal with the spiritual growth and with the spiritual well-being of the people. To that end, they need someone to fight the wars. They need someone to do everything else. And these are those men that were enabled David to concentrate on what he should be concentrating. So Yoav ben Tzruya is the first one. The second one is a gentleman by the name of Yehoshaphat ben Achilud Maskir. Maskir is a secretary. It's translated here as recorder, but there are several opinions what he did, and he probably did a little bit of each. In those days, as we know, there was no recording, there was no media that was easily able to record events, no pictures, no sound, and it's all was writing it, right? Now, when the king is sitting and ruling or walking around and ruling, they didn't have stenographers, so they needed someone to remember all of the promises, all of the laws, all of the decrees, all of the policy, recorded afterwards on paper, and remind people what this is all about, and remind the people, make sure that the people know, but also make sure that the king himself is held accountable, and if he promises it during a campaign run or something, during a trip somewhere, he promised something, he got to make sure that this happens. So this Yehoshaphat ben Achilud is that kind of guy. He is the recorder. Also, there is another explanation, and he probably had both hats, and probably a little bit of each, and that is more of the gatekeeper. Okay, it was very important in those days, as it is right now, to stand in line and not to cut the line. So when people needed to see David, someone needed to make sure that it happens in the right order. So that gentleman was the one. So he was, I guess, the chief of staff or the gatekeeper, as well as the recorder, the official secretary that took notes and made sure that everybody knew what the king said, and make sure that the king himself is remembering and doing what he promised. The next verse is talking about two Kohanim and Sraya Sofer. Okay, v'Tzadok ben Achitu v'Achimelech ben Eviatar, Kohanim and Sraya Sofer. So who were those Tzadok and and Achimelech. Very important characters. Let's talk a little bit about the history. Okay, Kohanim are coming from from Aaron HaKohen, right? All came from Aaron HaKohen. Aaron HaKohen had 4 children. 2 of them died because they were too dedicated for their own good, and they died in the Bet HaMikdash yearning for God. They didn't survive. The only other ones that survived were Elazar and Itamar. Okay? And they were the Kohanim that, from those 2, all of the Kohanim came from. For a period of time, Itamar was the one that produced the Kohanim Gdolim, the high priests. The Kohen Gadol and all of the important ones came from Itamar. And that was true until the time of Eli. Eli was the last of the Shoftim, right? The last of the judges. He was the Rav, the teacher that raised and taught Shmuel, the prophet Shmuel. And he had some problem in the family, meaning he was not educating his children properly, and he was criticized for it. And because his children did not act properly during around the Bet HaMikdash, the promise was that they're not going to remain, that their dynasty is not, they got cursed, and their dynasty is not going to remain the Kohanim. And the baton was transferred back to the brother, to the lineage of the other brother, to the lineage of Elazar. Okay? Now, so Tzadok ben Achituv is from Elazar. He is from the new Kohanim Gdolim, right? Achimelech ben Evyatar is from Itamar. He is from the old guards. Evyatar was the sole survivor of the massacre of Nov. Shaul, in one of his irrational behaviors and knee-jerk reactions, killed the entire city of Nov. Nov was the city where the Bet HaMikdash was, the Mishkan was, the tabernacle was, and he had like 85 or 83 Kohanim over there, and he killed them all. Evyatar was the sole survivor, and Evyatar attached himself to David. But he was still from that family, from that dynasty of Eli, who was promised not, God cursed him, and, he was not to be the one. But for the time being, he was with David. He was one of the loyal ones, until to a point, okay? Later on in life, when Avshalom, the youngest son, one of the youngest son of David, who were creating a revolution. So Tzadok and Evyatar both went with David and were all 4 of them, Tzadok and his father Achituv, Achimelech and his father Evyatar, they all joined David and really were loyal. At the very end, when the time came to decide who is the actual successor, so Tzadok was the one that went with Shlomo, and he, as a result, became the Kohen Gadol, the high priest forever and ever, his dynasty. They were the mentioned several times later on in the book of prophets as the ones that were loyal throughout the time of the first temple. Okay? Throughout the time of Beit Rishon, of first temple, the Bnei Tzadok, HaKohanim HaLeviim Bnei Tzadok, the sons of Tzadok, they were the ones that didn't go and went for idol worship. Those were the ones that really remained loyal to the Torah. And they're the ones that produced all of the high priests of the Kohanim Gdolim. And Yecheskel, the prophet Yecheskel, the last of the prophets, the big prophets, he mentioned that the Kohen Gadol in the third temple, the Beit Shlishi, when Mashiach comes, will be from that dynasty as well, Tzadok. So that's Tzadok ben Achituv. He was there, and he was a Kohen. And he was together with Achimelech ben Evyatar, they were the Kohanim. Now, we know that Kohen Gadol, we have only one. Here you have two. They're not saying Kohen Gadol, but they were both Kohanim. And later on, we'll see in the next verse that the sons of David were Kohanim, which is strange because the David HaMelech is from the tribe of Yehudah. What Kohanim we're talking about? So it turns out that that the word Kohen is used here in two different meanings. There were two types of Kohanim. The Kohanim in general had two jobs. One job was to run the Beit HaMikdash, the sacrifices, the korbanot, to manage, all of the work that had to happen in Beit HaMikdash. That's one thing. Another thing that the Kohanim did, they were the leaders of the nation. They were the teachers. They were the spiritual leaders, the pulpit rabbis. They were the ones that would scattered in 48 special cities, and as well as in the other cities as well, here and there. And they were the ones that would teach the people, and they got their authority from the fact that they were in Beit HaMikdash. In Beit HaMikdash, that's where all the action was, where the Kohen Gadol was, where, a lot of time the prophet would be there a lot. Shmuel, for example, he grew up in Beit HaMikdash. So that gave them that strength. Now, when the ark was separated from the Beit HaMikdash, when it was taken by the Philistines, right, by the Philistines in the war, and then it did not join back to Beit HaMikdash until the time of King Solomon, Shlomo, when they put together the first temple in the first Beit HaMikdash in Yerushalayim. It's not the Mishkan, it's Beit HaMikdash. So before it was Mishkan Shiloh, but it's Mishkan Shiloh, it was a building that had walls of stone and no roof. So it is a mikdash of sorts. It wasn't just, the question was, before the first Bet HaMikdash, I'm calling it Bet HaMikdash, but it wasn't really Bet HaMikdash. It wasn't a house. But it was a semi-house. It was a house that had walls, and the cover was high from the tabernacle. But the walls were not from the tabernacle. So it's like it was a mixture, a combo. Anyway, but the bottom line is, where was I? That until when the ark was separated from the Mishkan, the Mikdash, the rest of the structure, what happens is that it became allowed to bring sacrifices not only in Bet HaMikdash, because Bet HaMikdash, or the Mishkan, whatever it was not really fully holy because the ark was not there. So there was no real point, or there was no point in enforcing bringing the sacrifices to that structure when the ark is not there. So what became is the bamot, the podiums, or the individual sacrifices. You in the backyard, you could have built your own mizbeach and sacrifice animals, which means you didn't need to be a Kohen to do it, because so suddenly the Kohanim lost this authority of, we are the only ones connected to holiness, because holiness was available everywhere else, anywhere in the country it was available, and therefore the work of being a teacher also was was spread amongst other people. So, and those were also Kohanim. So, but Kohanim in job, not Kohanim in blood. They were not from the Shevet Levi, but the Kohanim in job, that they were teachers. So later on, we will see in the next verse that the sons of David, because of their education, because of their knowledge, because they were so knowledgeable and so pious, they became the teachers. He had many, many, many children, okay? And they became the leaders of the Jewish people, and they were by his side, throughout, especially after he was promised that his house is going to continue to be the house of David as we know it, the leadership, the kingdom, the kingship of the Jewish people forever and ever. So they all stayed around. So, but here is mentioning the Kohanim, Tzadok and Achimelech. Those were the real Kohanim, the Kohanim, from the tribe of Levi. And then there was Sraya Sofer. Sraya Sofer was the scribe. Why do you need a scribe? You need a scribe in order to write all of what the secretary is recording. You need somebody to scribe. So he scribed it, so he was a stenographer on the one hand. But also he is the person who recorded the songs of David in Tehillim. So there was a lot of demand for first edition of Tehillim and second and third, and he's the one that wrote it by hand. And his name Sraya Sofer. He was right there and very important. Because of him, we have the book of Tehillim, or partially because of him. He's the one that merited to be the scribe for it. And then we have Bnayahu ben Yehoyada v'Akreti v'Apleti. Bnayahu ben Yehoyada was a commander. And Kreti v'Apleti were two families that ended up being the elite unit of David HaMelech. Okay? In those days, like today, you had a nation that was really good in fighting, and in that area of the world was the Philistines. They were they had advanced weapons, they had advanced methods, and we learned it from them. And David HaMelech did not hire anyone who's not, from most of the people, most of the soldiers were our people. But they learned the methods from the Philistines, and Akreti v'Apleti, those two families learned specifically two jobs. They learn how to be archers, and they learn how to be managing the catapult. Okay, the machine that throws stones. The mortar of those days, right? And they were so those were the advanced weapons, and you needed to give the advanced weapons to the most loyal people, and they were the most loyal people. The Kreti, those two families were at David's side, like the top guards, and they were led by Bnayahu ben Yehoyada. And then he mentions what we mentioned before, Uvnei David Kohanim hayu. And the sons of David were priests. What priests? They were from the tribe of Yehuda. But as we mentioned, they were taking the job of teaching, and that's why they're mentioned here. So these are David's men. This is who David took with him, selected to go with him to war and to build the nation. And that's where they mentioned here, because they had a hand in the building of the nation. So they deserve a mention. That's why they're here. Now, the next chapter, it's a shorter chapter, 13 verses in all. We're not really sure 100% when it happened. It's sort of stuck here in the middle, and it happened in the middle somewhere, but we don't know when. It's stuck in between the summary of the wars and detailed battles. Why? Detailed battles that mentioned before. So we don't know when it was. It's talking about David HaMelech. It seems like it was early on, not the very first thing, but early on in David's ruling on Yerushalayim. So it's after 7 years of Hebron. I don't know, 10, 15 years into David's kingdom, something like that. What is the topic here? The topic here is a promise that David gave, and he is intending to keep. And that promise was given to his best friend, Yonatan. Yonatan, we remember, the oldest son of Shaul, one of them that died with Shaul, with three of Shaul had 4 sons. 3 of them died with him in the war, and Yonatan was one of them. Yonatan fell in love, struck an amazing friendship with David, was very loyal to him, saved his life when his father Shaul wanted to kill David, wanted to capture him or kill him or whatever. Yonatan basically saved him and told him when and how to run away. And David HaMelech was very loyal back, and he made a promise. Yonatan knew Jonathan was a pious person, was a prophet. He knew that David is going to be the king. And he knew that typically the custom was that when a new king comes, they kill the entire family of the king before. So you don't have any heirs to the throne. You don't have anybody who has bones, any hold the grudges against the new king. And nobody's, the problem is not going to come from there. And that was the absolute custom in those days. So when David HaMelech became the king of all the Jews, all of the survivors, and there were a few of them, of the house of Shaul, got scared to death. And they ran away. And they hid in all corners of the country. They didn't want to, they really hid because they were scared that they're just going to be on a chopping block. Simply so, and they tried to, live under the radar, in hiding, in disguise. It was incredible. They didn't know, that was the way it was. If there is a new king, the previous king's family, gone. Now, David HaMelech he had tremendous respect to Shaul. Throughout, as we learn, he respected him because God selected Shaul to be the king of the Jews, the first king, and he would not touch him or his family in any way, shape, or form. And the fourth son of Shaul, who ruled for a couple of years after his father's death, was assassinated, and the murderers were killed instantly by David HaMelech, because David HaMelech did not stand and would not stand for desecrating or hurting the family of Shaul. And he gave his promise to Jonathan that he is going to take care of his family. Okay, so now that David HaMelech gave this promise to Jonathan, it's time to fulfill it. So Vayamar David. So David says, Achi yesh od asher notar lebet Shaul. Do we have anyone left to the house of David? Now don't forget that David HaMelech married into the house of Shaul, right? One of Shaul's daughter, Michal, was David's wife. So why is he asking? He knew exactly, right? He knew the family. He knew exactly all. He's not like me. He remembered the nephews and the nieces. And he knows. It's not, some of us don't. So what is he asking? He's asking because they were all scattered. And they were all gone. And when you don't see someone for 2-3 years, you don't know if they're dead or alive. So he's asking, do we have anyone alive for the house of Shaul? Ve'seimo chesed, and I want to do some charity with him. I want to do some chesed with that person. Ba'avur Yonatan, because of my promise and my relationship to Yonatan. So Yonatan is, even if it's not the son of Yonatan, right? He's asking anyone for the house of Shaul, right? Now, Ve'seimo chesed is a key word here. It means here to give them some public office, to make them in charge of something. That's Ve'seimo chesed. Is not just because when someone is on the top of the world, they grew up in the White House, they grew up in the palace, they're part of the royal family, and now they're hiding and afraid for their lives, and they don't reveal their identity. So just to make them reveal their identity and not hide, that's not chesed. They still not they're not on top of the world anymore. So he wanted to make whoever left to the house of Shaul to give them public office and make them part of the ruling class. Now, what happened? Very interesting. What happened after all of the blood survivors of the house of Shaul scattered around the country trying to hide, there was one person left. And that person was not a blood relative. That's why he didn't have to run away. He was one of the slaves. Velebet Shaul eved u'shmo Tziva. Okay? So this Mr. Tziva was a slave. He was not Jewish. He was a Evet Knaani, a non-Jewish slave. And he's the only one that sort of remained. And he was he had a very strong personality. David HaMelech knew him from when he was in and out of the house of Shaul, right? He lived there for a period of time, and Tziva was there, and Tziva was in charge. He was in charge of all of the slaves, or was in charge of some section at the time of Shaul. But now, all of Shaul's men, all of Shaul's family is gone, so Tziva took control over a lot of property. Now, he couldn't take control over the real estate, because, David HaMelech came, and, that's his now, because Ishboshet, the fourth son of Shaul, who was not anointed by a prophet, and therefore he was not a legitimate king. He was a king by virtue of being the son of Shaul, but in those days, the leader was anointed by a prophet. All of the prophets before, the Shoftim, the judges, were handled by a prophet, told them to become one. It's not, it wasn't just somebody wake up in the morning and say, well, my name is X, I'm the son of Shaul, so therefore I'm a king. So he was sort of an illegitimate king, especially after the fact that Shmuel, before he passed away, he anointed David to be a king. So David knew that he's a king, and he also knew that Ishboshet is not. So Ishboshet was considered a rebel. And therefore, after he was assassinated by hoodlums, the property that belonged to him, and which means he was the survivor, the sole son, survivor son of the house of Shaul. So he took control over all of the property, real estate and non-real estate. So the real estate went to David right away, but Tziva, who was the slave, he made sure to take control over a whole bunch of other properties, and sort of he was not left with nothing. Okay, so Tziva is the only one that was, and he lived where the property was, which is in the capital city, around Yerushalayim. So, and David could not find anyone who is going to say, yeah, I'm from the house of Shaul, because they were afraid that will be their last sentence. But Tziva was not afraid of that. So he says, ויקראו לו אל דוד, ויאמר המלך אליו, אתה ציווה ויאמר עבדך. So they called him to David HaMelech, and so he shows up, and what does David HaMelech ask him? Are you Tziva? What does it mean, are you Tziva? Very, very interesting. The Gemara is full of a lot of halachot about slaves, all from these stories. So we'll touch upon them. So what's the story? What is the halacha with slaves? There are two types of slaves, right? There is a Jewish slave, Eved Ivri, and a non-Jewish slave, Eved Knani. A Jewish slave, Eved Ivri, can be only a slave for 7 years, right? And after 7 years, he has to go free unless he wants to stay, and it's not recommended, whatever. And then he can stay forever. But a regular slave can be sold only for up to 7 years. Up to 7 years. A non-Jewish slave is not like that. And the rule is, the halacha is, that they can be sold forever. That they are sold forever. And but if somehow they are being released, which is very much discouraged, don't release, because the nation didn't want to have a bunch of former slaves running around. They usually, the morals are not that high, and they didn't want so the Torah is recommending not to really release a non-Jewish slave ever. But if it happens to be that they release, like maybe the owner died and he doesn't have any heirs, so he goes free. When he goes free, he becomes Jewish. He converts. He's basically has to convert. So his entire life as a slave is training for the possibility, a remote possibility, but the possibility that he's going to go free, and then he will become a full-fledged Jew, and he will change his name. He will have to change his name to a Jewish name. So that's the question here. Ata Tziva, are you still Tziva? Is your name still Tziva? Or because all of the heirs are gone. I don't see any of the heirs to the house of Shaul, and you were a slave over there. So now you're basically free, and if you're free, you're not tzivah anymore, because you have to convert, and So that was the question here. Now, there is a very interesting story in the Gemara. One of the rabbis, Rabbi Eliezer, had a non-Jewish slave, and there were 9 men standing in shul, trying to daven, and they needed a 10th, and there was no 10th. Unfortunately, we see it from time to time here, in Mincha Ma'ariv, right? So Rabbi Eliezer freed his slave. The only other person that was there was the slave of Rabbi Eliezer, who was non-Jewish slave. So he freed him, and with that he became Jewish, and he was eligible to be mashlim to the minyan. So very, very handy story in the Gemara about this situation. But anyway, what happens here is this tzivah was located, was brought to David. David tells him, are you still a slave? Which means there is another owner, there is another person who is that belongs to the house of Shaul, or not. Vayomer avdecha. So what does he do? He's very smart. He knows how to to kiss all of the sides and to be nice to everyone. So he said, no, I'm your slave. I'm still tzivah. I'm still a non-Jewish slave, but I'm your slave. Which again, the rabbis are struggling with. How did that transfer of ownership happen? On account of what? Not going to go into all of that discussion now. Deep halachic discussions. But the bottom line is, he was playing a very not nice game. Okay, so David HaMelech read between the lines very well, and he said, "Oh, okay. So you still tzivah? That means that there is someone." So Vayomer HaMelech, ha'efes od ish lebet Shaul. Is there anyone left to the house of Saul? Right? Ve'seimo chesed elokim, and I will do I will do chesed with the person. I will raise him as an account of what God really wanted to do to them originally, right? It's the charity of God. It's not. I'm not going to do anything wrong. It's all going to be under the auspices of God. It's all going to be right. So, is there anyone, any survivor? Vayomer tzivai lamelech. So tzivai says yes. Od ben leYonatan nechei raglayim. Yes, there is a son who is the son of Yonatan, and he is a cripple. He has he's limping. Well, what happened to this son? We remember this story several chapters ago, when Yonatan had a son. His name was, his real name was Daniel. It was, I forgot his real name. Not Daniel. His name was something, whatever. Now he's called Mephibosheth. That's the name here. But that name was a given name after the fact. But anyway, he was 5 years old when his father, Yonatan, died in a battle with Shaul. And his nanny heard that that's what happened. So, and she knew that now there will be chaos, and the likelihood is that someone will come to retaliate and kill the entire family of the king, either the enemies who killed Shaul and his sons, or some other king, Jewish king, who will take over. So she took off, and she grabbed the child, and she took off, and she started running, and as she was running, she fell, and she fell with the child, and he broke both of his legs, and he became crippled because they didn't have, she was continued to running, and didn't give him medical treatment, proper medical treatment, no cast or anything. And so he became a cripple, and he was known as a cripple. So what does Tzivah say? Tzivah says, yes, he has a son. He was asked, is there a son? And, because I want to make him someone in charge. I want to give him an office. So he said, yes, there is a son, but he's not good for an office. He is a cripple. And in those days, to be a cripple without proper ability to stand and to run and to carry yourself properly, at least according to Tziva's ideas, that's not a person that can be in charge of anything. He's not fit for that job. That's the answer that Tziva gives David, and David right away, his antennas, go up right away, and we will see in the next verse where that leads us. Vayomer lo HaMelech. So David HaMelech continues the discussion. So where is he? So Tziva says, Vayomer Tziva el HaMelech, Hinehu bet Machir ben Amiel belo davar. He is hiding in the house of Machir, the son of Amiel, somewhere. I don't know who this guy is. It's not discussed here. And belo davar. Lo davar can be interpreted as the name of the place, belo davar. But the rabbis also are saying that he meant to say, it says belo davar, belo, it's written bet lamed vav, but he meant it as belo, with bet lamed aleph, with a no. He's there with nothing. He is hiding. This son of Yehonatan is hiding in the house of Machir with nothing. What do you mean nothing? He is a nothing. He doesn't have anything. He's a nobody. He's a cripple, and he is also nobody mentally. Now, I'll tell you a secret. He was very far from a nobody. He was a very, very knowledgeable person. He was a super duper star in terms of his knowledge. The son of Yonatan. Yonatan was one of the most knowledgeable people in our history. And his son Mephibosheth took after him. And he was so smart that later on we'll see he would live around the David HaMelech. He would challenge David halachically. He knew so much that he would challenge David halachically. And it came to a point where he sort of, it's hard to say, but that's how the rabbis call it. He put him to shame several times. Mephibosheth put David to shame in terms of his knowledge. He knew more. He understood a lot. So David had another son, Kilav, the son of Abigail, one of the most beautiful women ever lived. So her son Kilav was a very pious person, and he's the one that always would take on. He was the same age group as the Mephibosheth, the son of Yonatan. Yonatan and David were around the same age, so their sons were the same age. And he's the one that would argue and save the honor of David HaMelech. So Mephibosheth was very far from lo davar, from nobody. So Vaishlach HaMelech David. So David HaMelech sends, as soon as he knows where this guy is, he wants him, come on over. Vaikacheu mibet Machir ben Amiel milo davar. So he sends to bring that person, that son of Yonatan, to the palace. Now, here, so look at the last two words of the last verses. One of them is belo davar, with nothing. Milo davar, from nowhere. Okay? But milo davar also here, so the rabbis are changing law here also to aleph, the vav changing to aleph, and from here it says male davar. So when David HaMelech sends to pick up the son of Yonatan, instead of a nobody, he's finding a big someone, maleh davar, someone who's full of knowledge, full of ability, full of intellectual capacity. That's not a nobody, all right? But being a cripple was the problem, okay? It was a big problem in those days. They didn't have wheelchairs. They had sticks. They didn't, and typically a cripple, a person who couldn't walk on their own, would be carried by someone. It was very not dignified. Vayavo Mephibosheth ben Yonatan ben Shaul el David. So Mephibosheth, the son of Yonatan, and here we're adding also the son of Shaul. Why are we adding the son of Shaul? Everybody knows that. So two interpretations. One of them saying that Mephibosheth was not really totally loyal to David like Yonatan. He was more like Shaul. But others are saying, and I sort of like it better, and it works better with the rest, with what's coming later, is that he wanted to fix the problem that Shaul created with David. Shaul did not have the right attitude about David, as we all know. And Mephibosheth decided, okay, let me take the opportunity now that David is calling me. I will right the wrong that Shaul did. So, as his grandson, I have more strength to do it. So he came, El David, Vayipol al panav vayishtachu, and he right away, again, he doesn't know that David is coming with an offer to do something with a positive attitude. He thought that he was caught, he was discovered, and this is it. That's his last day in life. So he fell on his face, he's bowing down to David. Vayomer David, Mephibosheth. Vayomer inei avdecha. So David HaMelech is calling him by his name, Mephibosheth. How you doing? We didn't see you in a long time. Last time I saw you, you were 5, and you were walking. And now it probably was 20 at the time, 15, 20, 18, something like that. A young man. Vayomer inei avdecha. So he right away declares that he is loyal to David, and he's ready for. Let me see. Is the rabbi here? I don't know. Rabbi here? Yes? No? Anybody sees? Not yet. All right. So a couple more minutes. What? So Vayomer David. Al tira. So right away David told him, don't be scared. I'm not going to chop your head off. Okay? Ki aso eseimcha chesed. I'm going to do charity. I'm going to do chesed. I'm going to be a mensch with you. Ba'avur Yonatan avicha, because I promised to your father Yonatan. Va'ashivoti lecha et kol zde Shaul avicha, and I'm going to give you back all of the property, the real estate, immense real estate that Shaul had at the time. When he finished, by the time he finished his life, he had a lot of vasts of land, a lot of property. So all of that, all of the sadeh, I'm going to give it back to you. V'ata tochal lechem al shulchani tamid, and you're invited to eat on my table all the time, to be always on my table, at my table. And it became so. He frequented, the meals at the house of the palace with David HaMelech, and this is how they interacted, and this is how David HaMelech considered him his teacher in a way. Amazing, because he had an unbelievable intellectual capacity. So Vayishtachu, so he bows down, Mephibosheth bows down, and said, Ma avdecha ki panita el hakelev hamet asher kamoni. Who am I? I'm a dead dog that you are, is the rabbi not coming? Who am I? We'll finish. I'll just explain this one and we'll finish. So who am I that I'm a dead dog? And he used that as a key word, because this is exact words that David HaMelech introduced himself to Shaul. When Shaul wanted to give him something, he said, who are you? What are you asking? I'm a dead dog. It's a dead dog is till this very day not something that anybody is aspiring to be. So Mephibosheth knew that David HaMelech used it. He was there, or he remembered, or he was told. He was young, but he was. So he used the same words that David at the time used to introduce himself to Shaul. He used to introduce himself to David and said, "I'm not. Who am I? I'm a nobody." We'll leave it at this for now, and we'll continue next time with the rest of the interaction between Mephibosheth and David.